The learning objectives of our lecture for today: first is to define energy requirements. Second, describe the factors affecting energy requirements. And to understand how to calculate energy requirements. Also, one of the objectives is to calculate how much carbohydrates, fat, and protein are required in grams to meet daily requirements. In the previous lecture, we defined energy as the ability to perform work, produce change, and maintain life. And as you know, energy exists in many forms, and each type can be converted from one form to another. In the human body, chemical energy from food is converted to mechanical energy and heat. And the major dietary sources of energy are carbohydrates, fat, and protein. So, the human body needs a continuous regulated supply of nutrients. Energy required for all the body processes, growth, and physical activity. Even at rest, the body requires energy for muscle contraction, active transport of molecules, ions, and synthesis of macromolecules from simple precursors. Energy requirements defined as amount of food energy needed to balance energy expenditure in order to maintain body size, body composition, and level of necessary and desirable physical activity consistent with long-term good health. Body composition is the proportion of muscle, bone, fat, and other tissues that make up body weight. So, achieving and maintaining a healthy weight is about managing energy balance and increase the proportion of lean to fat tissue. Previously, we discussed this figure, which demonstrates the neutral energy balance, in which the energy in equal to energy out. We explained this figure in the last week lecture, just to refresh your memory regarding the different states of energy balance: the neutral energy balance to maintain body weight, and the positive energy balance, in which leading to gaining weight, and the negative energy balance leading to lose weight. This figure illustrates how to know the energy content of food burning in pump calorimeter from the food label, and the energy expressed either in kilojoule or sometimes expressed in kilocalorie. Sources of stored energy. When food is not available, as during sleep or longer periods of fasting or extreme stress or starvation, the body draws energy from its stores. There are three energy stores. First one is glycogen. A 12 to 48 hour reserve of glycogen exists in liver and muscles and quickly depleted if not replenished by daily food intake. For example, glycogen stores maintain normal blood glucose levels for body functions during sleep hours. The second source of stored energy in the body is adipose tissue. Although fat storage is larger than glycogen, the supply varies from person to person, and the balanced amount needs to maintain as an added resource. The third source of stored energy is muscle mass. Energy stored as protein exists in limited amounts in muscle mass, but this lean mass must be maintained for health. Only during longer periods of fasting or starvation, body turns these tissues to energy. Total energy requirements. This depends on the summation of three components, which are the basal metabolic rate, physical activity, and specific dynamic action of food, or what is called the thermic effect of food. The fourth factor or fourth component, other factors like growth, pregnancy, lactation, and temperature regulation. So, energy requirement equal to basal metabolic rate plus physical activity plus thermic effect of food. First, we have to throw a light on the first component of total energy requirement, which is the basal metabolic rate, which defined as the minimum amount of energy needed by the body at rest and fasting states to sustain life processes. Basal energy expenditure is measured as basal metabolic rate by direct and indirect calorimeter. What are the conditions to measure basal metabolic rate? There are certain conditions to measure basal metabolic rate. These are complete physical and mental rest, relaxed but not sleep, at least 12 hours after last meal, several hours after strenuous exercise or activity, and should be in a comfortable temperature and environment. Factors affecting basal metabolic rate. There are two types of factors affecting basal metabolic rate: the primary factors and secondary factors. The primary factors include first, surface area, since the basal metabolic rate more in taller person due to high surface area. The second factor is the gender. The basal metabolic rate lower in female by 5 to 10% than male of the same weight and height. The third factor is the age. Basal metabolic rate higher in children less than 2 years old than the adults because more energy required for rapid growth. Also, it is higher at puberty than adolescence, and the basal metabolic rate decreases by 2% for each decade of life due to fat accumulation. The fourth primary factor affecting the basal metabolic rate is endocrine secretion. Regarding thyroid gland hormone, in case of hypothyroidism, basal metabolic rate decreases by 30 to 50%, while in case of hyperthyroidism, the basal metabolic rate increases by 50 to 75%. Increased secretion of growth hormone will lead to increase the basal metabolic rate. Also, the sympathetic stimulation like stress, strain, and emotion will increase the basal metabolic rate. The secretion of sex hormone also affect the basal metabolic rate. For example, there is a fluctuation in the basal metabolic rate during the menstrual cycle. At mid-cycle, there is decrease in the basal metabolic rate, and there is increase by 7.7% in the post-ovulation. The fifth primary factor is the body composition, the basal metabolic rate more in muscular tissues. The pregnancy also affects the basal metabolic rate, since there is 20% increase in the basal metabolic rate in the third trimester. Regarding secondary factors affecting basal metabolic rate, the first one is the nutritional status. In severe malnutrition and prolonged starvation, this will lead to 50% decrease in the basal metabolic rate as adaptive mechanism. Sleep leads to 10% decrease in the basal metabolic rate. Fever leads to increase in the basal metabolic rate by 13% for each degree above 37 degrees Celsius. Muscle tone. In athletes, there is increase in the basal metabolic rate due to increase in the muscle tone. This is due to more oxygen consumption during muscle contraction. Climate. A low climate temperature increases the heat loss and leads to increase in the basal metabolic rate by 5% for each 10 degree decrease, especially in Eskimo. Also, an increase in the climate temperature leads to decrease in the basal metabolic rate as in Africa, but the basal energy expenditure will increase due to stimulation of sweating. The intake of caffeine also increases the basal metabolic rate. One of the important objectives of our lecture for today is to calculate the total energy requirement. So, we have to know how to calculate the basal metabolic rate, which is one of the components of the total energy requirement. So, basal metabolic rate for male equal to ideal body weight in kilogram multiplied by 1 kilocalorie per kg per hour multiplied by 24 hours. While for female equal to ideal body weight in kilogram multiplied by 0.95 kilocalorie per kg per hour multiplied by 24 hours. Also, we have to know how to calculate the second component of total energy requirement, which is physical activity. To calculate physical activity, either multiply the basal metabolic rate by activity factor or by rough classification of occupation or activity. At your level, we will depend on the second way, which is the rough classification of occupation. According to rough classification of occupation or activity, the physical activity can be classified into light activity or sedentary, which is equal to 20 to 30% of basal metabolic rate. Example of the light activity: office worker, lawyer, doctor, teacher, shop worker, and house cleaning. While moderate activity represents 40% of the basal metabolic rate, Example, industrial worker, farmer, student, soldier not in active work, that means not in the battle, and housewife carrying a load and cycling. Also, according to the rough classification, heavy activity represents 50% of the basal metabolic rate, like agriculture worker, unskilled laborer, mine worker, soldier in active service, and walking with a load uphill. Body composition influences basal metabolic rate. Weight training can help shift body composition towards more lean tissue. Mental activity does not appreciably affect the energy requirement. The effect of exercise on metabolism. Exercise increases metabolism. Immediate increase in the metabolism during exercise and post-exercise. Over time, there is also a paramount increase in basal metabolic rate as lean muscle tissue increases. Most important factor affecting the metabolic rate is the intensity or speed of the exercise. With continuous physical activity, body begins to adapt the stress of exercise and cause health benefits. You have to take a look on this figure, which is the physical activity pyramid, express the recommended physical activity. The third component of total energy requirement is the thermic effect of food. Specific dynamic action of food equal to the diet-induced thermogenesis. It is the extra energy released due to digestion, absorption, and metabolism of food reaches its maximum level 3 to 5 hours after ingestion of food. This effect is not equal for all types of food. Since the thermic effect of protein equal to 25 to 30% of basal metabolic rate, while the thermic effect of carbohydrates equal to 6% of basal metabolic rate. Regarding fat, the thermic effect of fat is equal to 4% of basal metabolic rate. The thermic effect of mixed diet equal to 6 to 10% of basal metabolic rate. Diet-induced thermogenesis. There is a significant elevation of the metabolism that occurs after ingestion of a meal. Energy needed to absorb, transport, store, and metabolize the food consumed. The highest elevation noticed 1 hour after meal and lasts for about 4 hours. The greater the caloric content of the meal, the greater the effect on metabolism. Protein and carbohydrates significantly increase thermogenesis while fat does not. I think now you have a good idea about how to calculate basal metabolic rate, physical activity, thermal effect of food. Therefore, let us try to solve this problem. A fourth-year medical male student whose ideal body weight is 60 kg, calculate first the total energy requirement, second his daily need of carbohydrate, protein, and fat. because he is a student, so his physical activity is moderate and represents 40% of basal metabolic rate. So to calculate the basal metabolic rate, we have to multiply his ideal body weight 60 kilogram by 1 kilocalorie per kg per hour because he is male, multiply by 24 hours. So the result is 1440 kilocalorie per day, represent the medical student basal metabolic rate. Don't forget the 10% of basal metabolic rate for sleep. So we have to multiply 0.1 by the basal metabolic rate, so it is equal to 144 kilocalorie, which is the decrease in the basal metabolic rate due to sleep. So we have to subtract the 144 from the basal metabolic rate, and the result is 1296 kilocalorie per day. Physical activity in this case is moderate physical activity, so it represents 40% of the basal metabolic rate, and it is equal to 576 kilocalorie per day. Regarding the thermic effect of food, always we choose the thermic effect of mixed diet, which is 6%. So the result is 86 kilocalorie per day. So to obtain the total energy requirement, we have the summation of the basal metabolic rate, physical activity plus thermic effect of food, and it is equal to 1958 kilocalorie per day. To calculate his daily need of carbohydrate, you have to know that 50 to 60% of the total energy requirement should be obtained from carbohydrates. So energy from carbohydrate equal to 50% multiplied by the total energy requirement, which is 1958, which is equal to 979 kilocalorie. As you know, 1 gram of carbohydrates release 4 kilocalorie. So, by dividing the energy from carbohydrate 976 by 4, which is 4 kilocalorie released from each gram of carbohydrate, the result will be 245 grams of carbohydrate he needs daily. In the same way, we can calculate his daily need of protein, since the protein should constitute 15 to 20% of the total energy requirement. Multiply this percentage by the total energy requirement, which is equal to 294, the energy from a protein. And as you know, 1 gram of protein releases 4 kilocalorie. Therefore, we can divide the 294 by 4, resulted in 74 grams of protein he needs daily. In the same way, we can calculate the daily requirement of fat in a gram. since it constitutes 25 to 30%, so he needs about 54 grams of fat per day. We can divide the need of fat according to its types: 10% saturated fat, and fat should supply no more than 25 to 30% of the total calories of a healthy person well-balanced diet. The majority of these calories from fat, approximately 2/3, should consist of vegetable oil products, which is unsaturated fat, rather than animal food products or trans fat. Thank you very much for your listening. In the next lecture, we will continue to calculate the energy requirement in special conditions.